In the late 1800s, when I had just graduated from nursing at Loma Linda, I spent a year in Asheville. And I worked in the recovery room and the, what else was it? I guess it was the ICU. We had a combination ICU recovery room. And what I missed when I left was the music. Loved hearing the music on the piano this morning. I tell you, music can make me cry faster than anything else. Actually, not much else can make me cry, but music. So I had a really good year in Asheville with all the music. So how many of you never once in your entire life have ever been afraid of anything? It's pretty ubiquitous, isn't it? We are fearful about different things, but we are all fearful. It is the human condition. My father was a preacher. I told Barbara sometimes I think I shouldn't tell you that, because there's all of these stereotypes about preachers' kids, right? Of course, I don't have any of them. Anybody out there preacher's kid? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, good. I'm in company. You know, it's like a club. There actually is a club in the United States, Preacher's Kids Club. I haven't joined. But we do have some things in common. One of them being that the expectations of people in the congregation could never be met. I mean, if there'd been one global expectation, we probably could have met that. But I don't care how many people there were in my dad's congregations, 200, 500. They each had an expectation, and every expectation was different. And you can't meet that. So it's been an interesting journey for me. Each one of you has something like that in your life. It made me afraid for a long time that I could never get it right. And finally, we're learning how to let go of that. How many of you know that emotions and feelings are two separate brain functions? Oh, good. Some of you do. They are. So let's start talking a little bit about this. Lancet Medical Journal from England. Emotions and feelings follow different pathways in the brain. They're connected functions because feelings follow emotions, but they're two separate things. And it's important to understand that because, at least in English, we tend to use those words synonymously. The emotion of anger, and I'm angry. It's unfortunate that we don't have different words because they are different. So here's the deal. Emotions are measurable, physiological responses in your body to something that's happening outside of you or happening right inside of you. Automatic. We don't choose them. They occur based on what's going on inside of us and outside of us. So you're not responsible for every emotion that surfaces in your body. Feelings are the descriptions that your brain creates about what this emotion means. How important is it? And feelings have markers as well, but they definitely mirror the markers of emotions. So we don't always cause every emotion that arises, unless you've watched a really scary movie and then you wake up at night screaming with fear. Okay, that's your problem. We can and need to be responsible for the feelings we hang on to because our brain created them. And it's really empowering to know that. I am not a servant of my feelings. I choose. But feelings follow thoughts. So if you don't like the way you're feeling, guess what? You have to change your thought because feelings follow thoughts. Did you grow up learning that all emotions are positive? Nope, neither did I. But they are. Every single one of them is positive, designed to help us manage specific situations in life. So when there are negative things, it's not the emotion, it's the behaviors, the attitudes, the actions that are often taken around those emotions. Uterine scans. It's amazing to look at a uterine scan in a pregnant woman and see that little life starting. But as the scans have gotten better and better and better since about 1975, 1980, when the science of brain function was established, we can see expressions on that little fetal face based on what's happening in the mother's life. And sometimes the baby's happy. I happened to look at one the other day, and it was just moving around and kissing into the water, I guess. But it was so cute, and you knew, the mother's happy, the baby's happy. And then you see fear on the face of some of those little fetuses because the mother is being battered. And it's so sad, and so on. So I only talk about 4 core emotions because those are the 4 that you can see on the face of a fetus. And those are joy, which is the default position. Researchers believe the human brain is hardwired for joy, and that the 3 protective emotions just arise to give us information. So you want to live at joy most of the time. So there's joy, anger, fear, and sadness. At the bottom of the staircase is apathy, which is not an emotion, but it is a description of what happens when people don't know how to manage emotions. Get emotional overwhelm. Now they're apathetic. And you see euphoria here, which is not an emotion of its own, but it is brief, intense joy. Brain was never designed to live at euphoria. People whose lives aren't working and don't know that will get involved with an addictive process that gives them a momentary sense of pseudo-joy. But it burns out the brain and body quickly as well. Substance hardcore addicts rarely live beyond the age of 37. I'm aiming for 122 years, 165 days. Can't afford that. I was talking last night at the Ephesus church, and I mentioned Jean-Louise Calment, who was my role model for my age goal. When she died, she lived in the south of France, a little place called Arles. Sounds like the first part of my name, Arlene. When she died, she was 102 years old, 164 days. She can do it, I can do it. She took up fencing at age 85. She rode her bike, two-wheel bike, till she was 100. I mean, come on, we can do that. We've got the knowledge. We just have to apply it. Could not afford to go to any artificial triggers for euphoria because it's too hard on the body. PET scans, positron emission tomography. You know, it's a type of scan where we can watch the face of the fetus. Well, PET scans have shown that the 3 protective emotions, anger, fear, and sadness, align with the right hemisphere of the brain because it's got more white matter. Those long nerve axons that think fiber optics that have been wrapped with myelin, and information just flies across those neurons, 600 miles an hour. That's pretty fast. I mean, that's faster even than you can go on the Autobahn in Europe. Joy aligns with the left hemisphere. I find it so fascinating that the default the default position aligns with the left hemisphere, but all the protective emotions are in the right side of the brain where information travels so quickly. So what is fear? It is an emotion. It is a signal that you are in some kind of danger. Sounds simple on the face of it, but there's a couple kinds of danger. There's real, actual, imminent danger that is unsafe for you. And then there's imagined danger. Problem is they both trigger the stress response. This happens automatically, as I mentioned, as soon as the brain feels unsafe. And then the emotion of fear arises to give you information, something that you may not have picked up, may not have perceived. But it says, pay attention, look at this. That might be dangerous for you. You better do something. And we are often socialized growing up to dampen down the emotion of fear. When I worked for years with individuals who had perpetrated date rape and individuals who had been the recipients of date rape, if there was one thing I heard that was consistent, it was this. When we started to do whatever, I felt a little afraid, but I thought that's ridiculous. I don't think there's anything to be afraid about. And so they did not take action that could have potentially prevented the date rape. Therefore, an ability to identify fear quickly and accurately and get the information it's trying to give you is hugely important if you are going to be able to protect yourself in situations where you need to be protected, and it could save your life. If you cannot do that, you may not be able to protect yourself, and you may not be able to do anything to protect people you love. So it's a completely necessary, valuable emotion. Big fears. Well, in the United States, in large sample studies, the number one big fear used to be public speaking. Number two was airplane travel. They've shifted a little bit. Natural disasters have taken over, followed by terrorism, then airplane traffic, then public speaking, and then a few other things. So they're out there. As the pastor mentioned, the world is filled with fear, and for good reason. The good news is we don't have to be afraid. But we haven't known before, without PET scans, how not to be afraid and how to compensate for that. So the challenge with imagined fears, and they're different for every person, and yet there are some commonalities. A common one is I'm not good enough. Okay, preachers' kids often get that one. Or I'm not smart enough, not handsome enough, not pretty enough, don't fit in. Oh, believe me, that's one that I had because I didn't fit in. Can't meet expectations for 500 people, you don't fit in. And so on and so forth. You have imaginary fears, even as I did. You need to get them out and look at them in the face and deal with them. Because otherwise you will pay a price in your body. Because it can trigger the stress response every bit as strong as if the back doors of the church just crashed open and somebody came in here with an automatic rifle, started shooting up. You don't think you're pretty enough? You don't think anyone's ever going to love you? You don't think you're going to find a job that you can be successful at? You got the same kind of stress response. Not good for the brain and body. If you don't know how to manage fear, there's lots of potential complications. It kills ideas, it stifles creativity, undermines your confidence. Have you heard of writer's block? I had a good friend who was an author, actually said to me one day, I'm in a patch of writer's block. I can't write a word. And the longer writer's block lasted, the more fearful he became that it would never go away. It can escalate into phobias, immobility, apathy, remember down at the bottom of the emotion staircase, contribute to stress, illness, and disease, and lock down the prefrontal cortex. That's huge. So what do you fear? What are you afraid of? Because you're afraid of something. I have no idea what it is, but I know you're afraid of something because I've never met a person on the planet yet that wasn't. And the research is, if you're honest, you're afraid of something. So get it out, look at it, decide if it's real or imagined. If it's real, what can you do about it? If it's imagined, change the way you think. This is a cutaway of the brain. I'm sure you've seen pictures of that. You know, here's the brain stem and the cerebellum. This middle part here is called, well, this is sometimes called the reptilian brain, because that's all reptiles have. The middle part here, see this curved bridge? That's the corpus callosum, the largest of the 4 or 5 bridges that connect your 2 hemispheres. This is the mammalian layer. It's a step above reptiles. And since we're mammals, we have that part of the brain. And then up here you have what's called the cerebrum, the neocortex, gray matter. There's lots of names for that. Joseph Chilton Pearce, done a lot of research. Love what he says about the brain. Any fear or anger shifts energy and attention from the neocortex to the reptilian brain. Meaning, right up here behind your forehead is the only place, as far as we know now, that you have conscious thought, that you can plan, make decisions, problem solve. If you are in the grip of fear, the brain starts directing its energy and attention down through the mammalian layer and clear down to the reptilian layer. And when you're down here, no conscious thought, no easy access up here to all of those executive functions. So you've just put yourself in a pretty untenable position if you stay down there, because you can't problem solve, you can't plan, you can't access information and come up with strategies and implement them. Candace Pert, who is one of my favorite researchers, she worked for years for the National Institutes of Mental Health. She was the researcher who first identified opiate receptors in the brain. Those receptor molecules that opiates would lock onto, and that revolutionized the way we deal with addictive behaviors. Amazing woman. She was very clear that when you're gripped by a strong emotion, you are in a biochemically altered state, meaning that your brain responds in some ways much like it does when you're under the effect of drugs, except for joy. There are no negative consequences for the emotion of joy when maintained over time. Now you go back and read scripture and all the verses about joy, and you can understand the reason we are told to be joyful all the time. There's no negative consequences. I'm sure you're familiar with all the symptoms of fear. We won't go through them, but they can go from trembling to passing out and death. You know, people's hearts failing them for what? Fear. We see that in California with the earthquakes. Every single time we have a major earthquake, the news reports several people who died of fear, had a heart attack, died of fear. There are some male-female differences which we are just now learning about, and male-female differences truly are one of my favorite topics. We are more alike than we are different. People, males and females. But we got some differences, and if you understand them, they're just pure fun. If you don't, you can get upset with them, and that'll trigger the stress response. So males, they're pretty much socialized to discount risk and fear. I mean, they gotta be brave, right? They rarely exhibit fear as fear. They exhibit it as anger. And for a long time, counselors didn't understand that. And a man would come in and be just livid. He was so angry, and they'd start teaching him anger management. He wasn't angry, he was petrified about something, but he couldn't acknowledge that because real men aren't afraid. They tend to also exhibit excessive control. You know, it makes them feel like, they're in control. Come on, as far as we know, there's very few things that you can be in control of. One of them is your thoughts. You can control your thoughts if you want to, but you can't control much else. They will come across as very inflexible. Sometimes they'll come across as obsessive compulsive. It might not be the whole disorder, but they come across as obsessive compulsive. And if they are in a position of leadership, they start to act like dictators. Think about some of the people in this planet in positions of leadership. What's their style? Okay, that'll tell you a lot about how fearful they are. Now, women, they are socialized to avoid risk, not just discount it like males do. We're supposed to avoid it. And we are actually taught that in situations of anger, we should expect some male to rescue us. Well, that's kind of a burden on the men. And there are times when their strength and acumen is really needed. But I have no desire to be this helpless little thing. Although you guys can open the door for me anytime you want. You can help me up and downstairs. You can carry my luggage. You've got 3 times the upper body strength that I do. If you're my exact height, which is not very tall. Bill picked me up at the airport. I'm just now getting the crick out of my neck. Twice the lower body strength. I mean, you guys are powerful. And every once in a while, I'll see a man open the door for a woman, and she'll say, I can do it myself. And I think, oh, shut up. It just wrecks it for the rest of us. They sometimes exhibit fear directly, but they will often exhibit it as sadness. So they go to a counselor and they're sad, and they start trying to give them medication to reverse sadness. They're not sad, they're scared. But they don't really know how to express it. They are much more likely to express fear through tears. Just a couple slides about anxiety, in case you don't already know this. Anxiety, which is a part of fear, worry is a part of fear. Most common mental illness in the United States, most common. 40 million adults over 18. That's pretty close to 1 in what? 5, 6? Anxiety accounts for more than 1/3 of the $148 billion this country spends on anxiety disorders. And the most common forms in order of prevalence: generalized anxiety disorder, you don't really know what you're anxious about, you're just anxious. obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, and PTSD increasing as people come back from the armed services. And the current stats are you can expect about 20% of people who come back from active duty will have PTSD. However, fear of the unknown seems to be what is underlying a lot of these anxiety disorders. And I understand that. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen 5 minutes from now, never mind a year from now. And that used to bother me a little, but you know, trust in the Lord with all your heart. You know, what else can you do? And once you've got that, it doesn't matter what the unknown is. Some are going to be wonderful surprises. Some maybe not so wonderful, but that's fine. If you're upshifted, you can problem solve. Your response to fear tends to be learned in childhood. And since it is learned, you can always choose to relearn it in a healthier way. That's what's marvelous about the brain. It's very plastic in the sense that you can create new software anytime you want to do that. Joseph Ledoux, another wonderful researcher, has pointed out that emotional processes operate at much higher speed than thoughts. And we have learned recently, as I mentioned, that thoughts can cross neuron pathways at 600 miles per hour. We used to think it was only 200. It's at least 3 times faster than that, and if we get better equipment, maybe the speed will go up, who knows. Because of this, they often bypass the mind's linear reasoning process altogether. That simply means that if you have fearful thoughts, those start whirling around your brain 600 miles an hour, and then your brain starts moving its energy and attention down to that reptilian layer where you don't have any conscious thought. So it's worth paying attention to. What does unmanaged fear do? Well, there's some pretty negative outcomes if you hang on to it. You get reduced cognitive functions. All right, we've talked about that. Cognitive functions like learning. So a little kid who lives in an unsafe environment comes to school and can't learn because you can't learn when you're scared. You're not up in the part of the brain where you learn. Don't do good at recalling information if you did manage to put it in long-term memory. Don't do well at problem solving. Don't do well at cause and effect reasoning. Oh, I saw that over and over and over again. There was one really good-looking young man that I was working with in one of the addiction programs, which helped me understand that looks and brains don't necessarily go together. So he's in the addiction program because of DUIs. Judge, after the second DUI, puts him in an addiction program, says to him, "Young man, you show up in my court again with driving under the influence, ticket, episode, you're going to lose your license for 3 years. Do you understand?" Uh-huh. So they send him back to the addiction program. He AWOLs, gets drunk, has an accident, goes back to court. Judge looks at him and says, "Young man, let me see here. You were in my court 11 days ago. You're back again with another DUI. What part of? If you come back here with another DUI, you're going to lose your license for 3 years. Did you not get?" "I don't know." Lost his license for 3 years. We found out he had been abused severely as a child, was very fearful, cause and effect, didn't put the pieces together, can't do the puzzle, and so on. But for those of us It accelerates the aging process. That's not where I'm going if I'm going to make it to 122 years, 165 days. You do a relapse. If you've got a history of addictive behaviors, it's easy to relapse. You suppress your immune system, not good, which increases your risk of disease and, of course, phobias. So I'm going to put a figure up here, and I want you to quickly tell me how many boxes are in this figure. 16, 17, 21. I don't know how many there are. But if this was a group of hardcore addicts, they would never get more than 17. Because you can count in your brain stem if you have the habit, but you can't do abstract thinking. So sure, there's 17, but there's 18, 19, 20 who said they couldn't be combinations. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, bigger boxes, 30, 31, and so on. You got to be upshifted, folks, to do abstract thinking, and life needs abstract thinking. What do you see first? Some of you are upshifted. Who saw the face first? Who saw the word first? Does everybody see them both? Good. For the addicts, I'd have to actually turn the face upside down so they could see the word liar. They could not read that because they were down in the first and second layers of the brain. So what's the antidote for fear? It's amazing to watch PET scans and how the cells light up in different parts of the brain based on what the person's thinking. So researchers have found that gratitude and thankfulness. I just got a new Apple Watch and it's ringing. I don't know why. Oh, it says I need to exercise. All right. This is hysterical. So, here we go. Brain scans have shown that while fear downshifts the brain, you know that term now, it just means your energy and attention goes from conscious thought down here to the brain stem, cerebellum. Gratitude upshifts it. So if you are fearful, all you need to do is think of something for which you are grateful and be really grateful for it, and that will get you back up here to conscious thought. Now, it is not always easy to implement, because how many of you, when you're terrified, want to stop and say, Arlene, you are thankful, and by the way, that's the way to talk to yourself. Your brain can only do what it thinks it can do, but you're the one who tells it what it can do, and you need to talk to it like it is a separate part of you, which it sort of is, even though it's all still in this housing. So back in August of 2014, I was lecturing in Southern California, and I got a call, not on my watch, because I didn't have it yet. Got a call on my cell phone, and a really good friend of mine in San Francisco said, "Are you all right?" I said, as far as I know, is there some reason I shouldn't be all right? Well, he says, there's this huge earthquake in your part of the world. I said, really? I don't know anything about that. Well, he says, turn on the TV. So I turned on the TV. Yes, there had been a 7.1 on the Richter scale earthquake, epicenter 3 miles from my house. I wasn't at home. So I called one of my friends who has a key to my house, and I said, will you check my house out? She called me on the phone crying. She said, your house is a disaster. All the windows are blown out in the porch room, and on and on and on. So I called a contractor I knew, and I said, I'm so-and-so. Can you go by my house and board up the windows that have blown out, and I'll just have to deal with it when I get home in 4 days? He started laughing, and he says, you think there's any plywood available in the whole county of Napa? I said, oh, I didn't think about that. He says, not to worry, Arlene, you're one of my customers. I always keep plywood in my garage. I'll have it done this afternoon. I mean, what do you do without friends? So I called San Francisco back, told them what was going on, and they said, we're going to meet you at your house when you get home. We don't want you to go in the house alone. I said, I'll be fine. Well, we're going to be there, so tell us when you get there, because we'll be in the driveway. And sure enough, I get home. There's the car there in the driveway. Open the garage door. The freezer has walked into the middle of the garage, pulled its plug out from the wall. The door is open. All the delicious food in there is on the floor, and it's not delicious anymore. In fact, you know, I had to close my nose. Opened the door to the kitchen, walked in, 4 inches of glass and broken dishes on the floor. Cupboard doors open, everything on the floor. I stood there and I started shaking, which is one of the symptoms of fear. Tears started streaming down my face, and I was immobile. In retrospect, I really didn't care about the stuff. It's just stuff. But it was a shock. This is where my safe place is, and it no longer looks safe. So we walked around the house. Every single picture was on the floor, every single mirror but one, but none of them broken, and so on. I, shaken and crying, not sobbing, just tears running down my face like Niagara Falls. I remembered the research. If you are afraid, all you need to do is be grateful. So I stopped, I took a deep breath, and I said, Arlene, you are so grateful you weren't here. You are so grateful there's no structural damage. You are so grateful nobody was hurt. 20 seconds, no shaking, no trembling, no tears. I looked at my friends and said, okay, let's hit it. What part do you want to do? I'm here to tell you from personal experience, gratitude is the antidote to fear. What do you suppose, I think I mentioned this last night. Paul and Silas in jail. What were they doing? Singing songs of praise. They weren't afraid. I tell you, we've got to learn that. So, bottom line, fear and gratitude cannot simultaneously coexist in the brain. It's one or the other. So gratitude is a form of joy. You can pretty much put everything back into those 4 core emotions, which is really interesting. Jowett says that gratitude is a vaccine, it's an antitoxin, and it's an antiseptic. Hey, antidote for fear is fine with me. This is one of the most helpful metaphors that I have ever come across, so I want to leave that with you. Your brain is a stage. Some of you who've studied Shakespeare remember he said, the world is a stage and we are only players. Your brain has a stage. I don't know what yours looks like. I'll tell you what mine looks like. When you do something in your mind's eye, money is no object. My stage is a beautiful half circle, 4 steps, imported pure Carrara marble from Italy. Has Corinthian pillars, solid gold. No gold plating for me, solid gold Corinthian pillars. And so on. Wings on either side of the stage, just a room, which is what happens in a real Broadway stage. The actors wait there till it's their turn to come out on stage. You are on stage every second you are alive. And you always have one assistant with you, one of those 4 core emotions. But you can only have one at a time because each has its own neuropeptide, its own specific chemical composition. So it's only one at a time. Joy is the default position. That's where you want most of the time. But if something happens that truly frightens you, or you have imagined fears that you're letting run away with you, out comes fear, pushes joy back in the wings, and now fear is out on the stage with you. If it's bona fide danger, that's a good thing, because it's going to whisper in your ear and give you some information, and hopefully you can take corrective action. The second, the nanosecond that you start being grateful, what do you suppose happens? Fear goes back into the wings, and here comes joy, because they cannot simultaneously be in the brain. So think about the stage in your brain. You are the stage manager. Franklin D. Roosevelt, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. That's not a bad comment, actually. And of course, Paul, be anxious about what? Nothing. And John, perfect love casts out fear. 2 definitions for perfect in most dictionaries. One is flawless, which is attributed to the deity. The other one is well suited to the task at hand. So I can always do that one. And the bottom line is, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Because it all starts in your brain. And I pray that you get this, because the world is dying in fear. People are dying from fear. And we have hope. That means we don't have to do that.